Hey everybody, how's it going? Listen, I ordered this new new album, Woodstock 2. New album, Woodstock 2. I have kind of a vinyl collection, you know, and I try to highlight my vinyl records sometimes, but I'm going to try to do it more. I've got some kind of gems in there. A lot of my albums are beat up, but I've had since I was a kid the original Woodstock album. Now this is the one, if you're my age, you've probably seen this and or like good rock and roll, this is the one that was made into a film. So most of the time when you see the footage, it's from this great album. It's a triple album set. You can see it there. It's got Philippine Pond, Adam and Eve, Naked and Unashamed, and Philippine Pond. It's got that huge crowd. And that was a great album, and I grew up listening to that, so I always kind of appreciated the Woodstock culture. But with the internet now, you can see more about Woodstock, and of course this wasn't exactly obscure, but if you look at the set list of that festival, there were all kinds of bands. Well, in 1971, this album came out. In 1970, the Woodstock album, basically, that most people associate it with, which I guess would now be considered Woodstock 1. But a year later, they came out with this album, Woodstock 2. By the way, this album is even more politically incorrect than Blind Faith. But maybe shows the less uptight nature of culture back then. I don't know, but anyway, this is Woodstock 2, and I ordered a copy off the internet, and it seemed like kind of a rare record. I paid about $20 for it. I've got some vinyl clips I'll show you. It folds out like the Woodstock 3, but there's really only a double album, and I think this was an attempt to show the Woodstock 1 album's got that huge fold out, almost like a centerfold of that huge crowd. This one shows the aftermath of it. So it's just all that barren devastation with 500,000 people. Just, it looks like locusts went through that field. I guess that would be Max Yasgur's farm. But they did intersperse these photos that kind of tried to show you what had been and then sort of the aftermath. But I got this album. I listened to it. In all candor, I listened to it over the internet, but then I kind of added the vinyl album to my collection. This is a vintage album. This isn't a reissue or anything. I like it. I think in some ways it's a more interesting album. Well, I've heard the first one so much. I've been listening to the first one since high school, so it's hard to tell. But I think the first one had a lot of It was definitely a sampling of the festival, because the festival was very diverse, very countercultural, very hippie, all that kind of stuff. But I do think that on the first album, they kind of picked the gems. You know, you had stuff that was a little more mainstream. You know, you had Joe Cocker. You know, Hendrix did Purple Haze on that first album. I mean, they kind of cherry picked those sets. You had Santana. You know, you had Sly Stone. I thought was a show stealer. I was reading on the internet that Sly Stone, if you see that footage, it's just, the place is just electric. And I read it was like 4 in the morning when he did that. Can you imagine? And the Who came on after that. Oh my gosh. But anyway, I think this one is more interesting because it gives you, you know, there was all kinds of music there, and this gives you sort of a more even more authentic slice of the concert. It's rougher in some ways. The selections aren't as familiar. I think even then it was sort of some of the selections that wouldn't have been on the radio all the time. And also, you know, it's kind of rougher. Sometimes the sound quality, you know, you can tell it's live. But I really thought this was pretty good. So it's more countercultural. You know, it just reminds you that Woodstock was a very countercultural event. It's kind of hard to imagine happening today. I saw someone talk once about how at Woodstock, one of the beginnings of the end was when some promoter flew over Woodstock and he saw 500,000 white middle class kids with disposable income, and not one person thought of selling a T-shirt. Can you imagine? There were no T-shirts. You couldn't go to some little stand and buy, you know, a Woodstock T-shirt. You know, among the other issues, you know, it was not commercial. Of course, they sold tickets. I think the promoters, Andrew Lang, wanted to get his money back, but it was not. It was not commercial in the sense there was virtually zero corporate presence. Public health today, they'd never let it happen today. And you know, the people that would stop it today, they're not like Pat Robertson, Jerry Falwell. If they could stop it, or they couldn't stop it. I'll tell you, the people who would stop it today are all these tight-ass lawyers, bureaucrats, public health people. You know, they would stop it today. Not Pat Robertson or Jerry Falwell. They would never let Woodstock happen today. You know, they sold their concession stands was raw veggies out of garbage cans distributed by some hippies from the hog farm, a commune called the Hog Farm. Their medical tent was the Freak Out tent, which was their first aid station, which mostly dealt with people who'd been partying too much. There was no security other than the hog farm. That was kind of like the Hells Angels being used at Altamont. They would never let that happen today, and it's not all the moral right-wingers that would stop it. It's all the bureaucrats, the you know, bicycle helmet wearing, you know, buckle up for safety crowd. They wouldn't even let, even I think any 70s concert in general, but something like Woodstock would never ever get even off to square one today.
We never sold a T-shirt or had cops out on patrol back before the corporations ruined rock and roll, back before the lawyers shut us down, when music was the only game in town. In the Freak Out tent at Woodstock, in the sun and in the shade, people came to see us when they needed some first aid. We'd put them in a folding chair to hear the music play in that old Freak Out tent at Woodstock, USA.
But anyway, I thought this was pretty interesting. It's a good selection. One of the things I'll say is it reminds you, now there's this, on the first album, you've got this too, but it reminds you that there was quite a bit of acoustic music. You know, it was Woodstock Music and Arts Festival. There was a lot of art. I think the art was kind of adjacent. I don't know how close it was to the music area, but it was a music and arts festival. So it was one part, this kind of, I think we'd remember it today as this kind of hard rock, you know, Hendrix, but a party atmosphere. But it was also kind of harkened back to the kind of New York early 60s folk scene. You know, you had Joan Baez, there was Richie Havens was kind of like that. So and Friday night was kind of an acoustic night. Now on this album you do have, Joan Baez sings Ballad of Joe Hill and Amazing Grace. By the way, kid, that's eclectic. That's another thing with marketing today. You'd get all these record companies, people, they'd say, you can't have, Joan Baez singing the Ballad of Joe Hill acoustically and then following it up with an a cappella version of Amazing Grace on the same bill with Jimi Hendrix and Joe Cocker and the Grease Band. But it was cool. And so that acoustic thing was really nice, and I think that added a lot. This album has some good acoustic selections on it, including Melanie. I don't know how many of you remember Melanie, but when I was a kid, she had that hit that was right at my time when I was listening to AM radio, CKLW in Detroit, which was actually a Canadian station. But Melanie had that song, I've got a brand new pair of roller skates. You've got a brand new key. So, she's got a couple on here that I really like. Beautiful People, Birthday of the Sun. One interesting thing, the sound is, I didn't think that it sounded like they're, but in a way it was pretty nice. They were just playing into mics, so it has a very folksy sound. And you also have, now I don't think they played the same night, but you have Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And there's some real gems. They do 4 and 20 on here, which is always a song I like. I grew up with that Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young So Far, which was kind of like a early greatest hits album for Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and it had 4 and 20 on it. And the one I think that's so beautiful is Gwenevere. Now they do Gwenevere on here, and it sounds really beautiful. Crosby, Stills, Nash and I don't know if Neil Young was on some of the songs, but I think some of their set at least was Crosby, Stills, Nash. So, but they do Gwenevere, and it's really pretty. It just shows why Crosby, Stills, and Nash were such good singers. They had such good songs, and of course on this album you've got Wooden Ships and. They do that famous version of Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, but on here you get to hear them do Gwenevere, and I think Gwenevere is a masterpiece. It's one of the most beautiful acoustic songs I've ever heard, and there's a very nice version of it. It's very nice sounding. It's got that live kind of folksy sound, so it doesn't sound like some pristine studio recording that was done perfect, but it's a good sound. It's got that ambience that you get from live playing into mics at loud volumes usually. It sounds really good. So there's some really good acoustic stuff on here, and then you've got some of the groups. I think you've got Mountain plays on here. They don't do Mississippi Queen. I'll have to check if they even had Mississippi Queen at that time, but Mountain, Canned Heat. Of course, Canned Heat ended up doing kind of the Woodstock theme song, going up to the country, baby, don't you want to go? But here you see more Canned Heat. Of course, they're in the movie too. But Canned Heat does Woodstock Boogie. Mountain does not do Mississippi Queen. They do a song called Blood of the Sun. You have the Paul Butterfield Blues Band. I think one of the standouts of the entire Woodstock show must have been Jefferson Airplane, which is a fantastic band. You know, and you hear a couple good selections. And again, I think on this, it seems like they're picking most of the songs they picked were not the ones you picked. So I think, and this was back in I think there was more of an album-oriented rock, and so they picked some ones that maybe weren't even as familiar to people at the time. But Jefferson Airplane does Saturday Afternoon, Won't You Try, and a song called Eskimo Blue Day, which is really cool. Great. It's got that kind of late 60s buzz. You just feel the 60s when you hear it. I think Jefferson Airplane really epitomizes the 60s. And by the way, Jefferson Starship is kind of a quintessential 70s band. I think like that album Red Octopus, which is a terrific album, but it just sort of sounds 70s, you know, it's like the soundtrack of the 70s. Jefferson Airplane sounds 60s, so I guess they must be good. They always just sort of captured the spirit of their time, but this is definitely Jefferson Airplane 60s. Grace Slick is great. But I guess one of the highlights for me was you get some pretty good Hendrix performances. Now in the movie and on this album, you've got Hendrix playing the Star Spangled Banner and Purple Haze. I think those are the two main Hendrix songs on here. But on which I think would be more familiar, more sensationalistic, I guess, with the Star Spangled Banner, but maybe something destined to be more popular. But here, I think you get some really good Hendrix playing. He does a song, it's called Hear My Train Coming, which is that good Hendrix song. The one you often see him play is an acoustic version. But on here you have him do an electric one, but it's called Get My Heart Back Together. I was wondering if that's a copyright thing. It was Hear My Train Coming, copyright. Of course, they weren't as uptight about copyright laws back then, but they did have them. But anyway, it's called Get My Heart Back Together, but it's really Hear My Train Coming. And the playing on it's really good. You know, it's got that kind of, if you ever hear Hendrix do Hear My Train Coming on acoustic, it's in that, all those kind of idioms in E major that are kind of blues idioms, and he kind of plays the rhythm and slides in bass slides and some of those blues licks kind of within an overall solo guitar. On here he does a great version on his white Woodstock Strat. I just thought the playing on it was extra good, you know, and very tasteful, and a power trio. It was definitely of the times, but some great examples of Hendrix. So it's got some of the audience announcements. It starts out with Hendrix Tuning. You know, I did that video, Tuning Your Guitar Past and Present, which was kind of interesting, and just thinking about how much we take for granted all these headstock tuners, tuning pedals, and what a big deal tuning was back in the old days of rock and roll, where you had to tune through the PA. So you actually hear Hendrix making some jokes about being out of tune. That's how the album starts, and kind of tuning. And it just reminds you, even technologically, we're so much different now, let alone culturally, socially, as a country and everything, we're so different. But technology-wise, you know, he's up there tuning. But it's a good album. Like I said, I paid about $20 for it. I feel like it was a good addition to my vinyl collection. And now there is a Woodstock 3. It's kind of tricky when you start to Google Woodstock and recordings. You get so much stuff and all these subsequent Woodstock festivals, and it's hard to know. But I think these were kind of the two of the time records. There's a Woodstock 3, but I think it was a 1994 release. So this was kind of the main original Woodstock concert album and movie album, and this kind of came out the following year. So these are the two big ones, and I'd grown up hearing that main Woodstock album just a ton. I know it quite well and love it. I think it's the greatest concert ever, I would say. It's because it's musically great, but also the significance of it. But if you want a kind of a fuller view of Woodstock, watch this one. It's got some. It gives you a sense of some of the other things at the festival, because when you listen to this album, it's like kind of a greatest hits of Woodstock, I would say. You know, it's like Woodstock's greatest hits. On this, you get kind of some of the. You get, I think, in some ways, more of a flavor of the diversity of Woodstock and the sort of countercultural nature of Woodstock and the rough edges of Woodstock, which if you've ever talked to people that were there, were definitely a part of it. So I recommend the album. I liked it, and I hope you'll check it out. I've been interspersing some clips from my little song, The Freakout Tent at Woodstock. I hope you'll listen to it. Thanks. God bless you.
After it was over, we looked back and then beyond. Thought of Jimi Hendrix and of Filippini Pond. And then we thought of Altamont and those kids at Kent State U. Now if you were there, I wonder what you'd do. And now it seems they never come on by. Could that be a touch of sadness in your eye? To that old freak-out tent at Woodstock, sometimes I wish I could still go, where no one told us what to do or how to run the show. And the long, strange trip that we've been on has lasted many a day, from that old freak-out tent at Woodstock, USA. 3 days of love and music back at Woodstock, USA.